Do you love cannabinoids? Do you love charts? Do you love your brain? Then have I got a paper for you. This excellent review article comes out of Spain, focusing on the CB2 receptor and its effects in neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric disorders. As a quick reminder, the CB2 receptor is the second discovered cannabinoid receptor. It's in almost all the organs of your body and is intimately tied up with your immune system. Intriguingly, the CB2 receptor only occurs at low levels in a healthy brain. But when you have some kind of a neural insult, the CB2 levels shoot up and help to coordinate a protective response. And this paper has lovely charts to show you how that works. For instance, here's a schematic of how the CB2 receptors modulate the responses of key players in the immune system. It inhibits T cells and B cells, which can help to suppress an excessive immune response. It activates the helper T cells, which are coordinators of immune cell responses. Of interest to multiple sclerosis, CB2 activation leads to increased neuronal myelination. Myelin is the protective fatty sheath that get it degraded in that disease and lead to loss of electrical signals. The CB2 receptor also modulates the levels of inflammatory cytokines. It alters microRNA, which are the small pieces of RNA that help to control the processing of proteins into their final form, which is a major control mechanism. And in one of the most important features, it alters your microglia into a less inflammatory state. Your microglial cells are known as your guardian immune cells of your brain, and their dysregulation is linked to almost every single neurodegenerative disease. Which takes us to neuroprotection. On the left, you can see how the CB2 receptors work to put the microglia into their M2 state, known as the resting or surveying state, instead of M1, their activated pro-inflammatory state. Then, in the neurons themselves, activating the CB2 receptor lowers excitability in the brain. A hallmark of many of these diseases is the brain firing too many electrical signals and causing excitotoxicity. The CB2 receptors help to calm that overactivity. The activation of CB2 also uses several pathways to lower inflammation in the brain and to promote neuronal regeneration. It also helps to heal the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cells, which is good because their dysregulation is common in neurodegenerative diseases. But it's not only neurodegeneration. Here's a timeline of the research on targeting the CB2 receptor for treating anxiety. It appears to use several mechanisms to lower anxiety, including by lowering activation of those microglial cells, using the neurotransmitter GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter used for calming things down, as well as altering genetic transcription in several regions of the brain. For that last one, you can see something called BCP also alters genetic transcription. That's beta-caryophyllene, one of the most common terpenes found in the cannabis plant, and it's also the only known terpene to also be a cannabinoid because it activates the CB2 receptor. So when you talk about the entourage effect of all the components of cannabis working together for good, having one of the terpenes also activate a cannabinoid receptor is part of what we're talking about. For depression, one early finding was that different genetic variants of a person's CB2 receptor can be linked to a susceptibility to depression, so we knew it must be involved somehow. Then we found out that beta-caryophyllene had an antidepressant effect. And then, very intriguingly, that treatment with some antidepressants caused the human brain to have higher levels of CB2 and CB2 genetic expression. And later, that combining some common antidepressants with drugs that activate the CB2 receptor increased their efficacy. Finally, for substance use disorders, an early finding was discovering the CB2 receptors in the area of the brain linked to the reward system. Then, in animal models, CB2 drugs were linked to help for cocaine, alcohol, and nicotine use disorders. And in mice that are engineered not to have any CB2 receptors, they have an increased susceptibility to things like alcohol and nicotine, and recently links to food addiction. For stimulants, activating the CB2 receptor with something like beta-caryophyllene reduced the rewarding effects. And then this paper goes on to cover the current clinical trials and the CB2 receptor for things like pain, IBS, Crohn's, autoimmune diseases, and even cystic fibrosis. So if you're interested in brains and cannabinoid receptors, this lovely paper will be a treat for you to review.